Welcome to episode 113. And in episode 111, I discussed the 5 signs that your small to medium-sized business is ready for HR support. And that led to some questions as to what kind of support. And then I had a conversation with an accountant this week who said to me that, he gets lots of clients that they know that they need HR help, but they don't really want to spend the money on hiring in an HR person. They don't know the kind of HR person to hire, and they never know when. And from his perspective, people always hire in HR when it's too late. So something I've also seen, so I thought I'd dedicate this episode to the pros and cons of fractional HR versus hiring in an HR manager. And if you're starting to feel the pressure of managing people, policies, or growth, but you're not quite sure what kind of HR support you need, then this episode is for you. So I'm going to talk about what is fractional HR and how does that compare to a full-time HR hire, the pros and cons for both, and of course, the costs that are associated with those different models. Now, you may not have heard the term fractional HR. It's started to get a bit more commonplace 18 months, 2 years ago. And you start now to hear about fractional HR, fractional CFOs, fractional marketing. So that might start to give you an inkling as to what it means. It is essentially a part-time external HR expert who works with your business on a flexible basis. So that might be a day a month, it could be a day a week. And basically you're not employing them. So they are a service provider like us at Amplify HR, usually with a high level experience, and they slot in where and when you need them. Full-time HR, on the other hand, is what it sounds like. So, they're on your payroll, they're your employee, they're working up to 38 hours a week, they're dedicated to your business, they're part of your team, they're sitting in your office or working remotely. They're usually doing everything HR related. So both options can work, but only if they match your business stage and your business needs. So let's look at each one and when they might be the right fit. So fractional HR is a great choice when you've typically got less than 50 to 60 employees. So that means that you don't need someone every day, but you do need regular, reliable support. So you want help with things like compliance, onboarding, and growing your culture, but there's just not the workload for a full-time hire. Maybe you're going through things like scaling or merging or restructuring. And sometimes people find that they've tried hiring an internal HR manager in the past, but it didn't work. And there's usually a few reasons for that. So, they don't have enough work. They become the policy police, or often they become another administrator and they don't offer the strategic input. And where I've seen this is where people get really frustrated because they feel like they've invested a lot of money into HR, but it's not delivering what they thought it would. So fractional HR is perfect when you need that strategic guidance along with the operational HR assistance. And as an example, I remember when we worked with a 30-person professional services firm, and they had hired a full-time HR manager in the past, but that person just ended up spending all their time working on lower level administrative tasks, which is not what the owners expected and not what they needed to elevate their business. So, they needed someone to guide the people and culture strategy, to get them compliant, to run development workshops with their leaders. And so they were getting really frustrated. But at the end of the day, they just weren't big enough to have an internal HR manager. So what tends to happen is the internal person starts to look for other things across the business that they could do. Or I've also seen it where people in the business don't really understand what HR is. And so anything that has the slightest connection to people, i.e. let's tell everyone when everyone's birthdays is, or let's organise the Christmas party, all ends up with the HR manager, and they become the facilities manager, the office manager, the receptionist, the everything. And they take it on because they just don't have enough work. But in the meantime, the business is paying this huge salary for what's essentially an administrative role. So, with the example that I was talking about, we came in and we supported them 2 days per month, which means that within 3 months, they'd actually saved around $40,000 compared to their full-time HR person, and they got that high impact result. And also, I suspect the HR person was much happier going somewhere else and being able to use their skills and experience in the way that they should be able to. So full-time HR tends to be a better fit when you're managing 60, 70 or 100 staff. You've got lots of day-to-day HR tasks like hiring and employee relations. You need someone who can be physically present every week and potentially across different locations. Or your business is really fast-paced with constant team movement. And really the key is capacity. Do you have enough ongoing work to keep someone in an HR role productive? So that clarity piece on the role, being super clear on what the outcomes are that you need from the role, is really important. And in episode 47, I discussed when it's the right time to hire your first HR person and gave you 6 tips to do that effectively. So you can go back to episode 47, or you could Google Amplify HR, 6 tips for hiring your first HR person, and you'll see that article. So let's talk about the pros and cons, because no option is perfect and it is going to depend on your circumstances. So with fractional HR, the pros are it's flexible and scalable. So you get what you need when you need it, which means that it's also cost effective. So you're not paying for a full-time salary and benefits, and you're getting that high level expertise. So you're getting a senior level HR partner without that executive level price tag. And I know something our clients really value is having that external perspective. So that's really helpful when you want fresh thinking or objectivity. The cons to fractional HR is that someone's not physically there every day, unless of course you book regular time. It might not suit environments that are really reactive. And it requires you to be a bit planned, because it's not a drop everything support unless, of course, you have an on-demand option. So the full-time HR pros is that there is that dedicated presence. So someone able to deal with issues as they pop up. You have that cultural embedding. So because they're there every day, they can be deeply involved in your team and your day-to-day operations. And of course, like I mentioned, you don't want them to get bored and to just end up with all this administrative people stuff. So it is best when you have a steady stream of employee issues, hiring or training needs. The full-time HR cons, it's expensive. So once you factor in salary, super, on costs, you're often looking at 180 to 200K a year. And I was talking to a recruiter recently, and he just placed someone at $250,000 in a 120 person business. Now, I honestly think that that sounds a little overpriced, but it's hard to find HR people right now, and they're not cheap. So, and it is harder to find someone with both strategic and hands-on skills at the right level. And of course, if the workload's light, then you might be paying more than the hours that you actually need someone there. So, going back to that salary, I thought 250 sounded a lot. So I had a look at the Robert Half salary calculator, which is online, it's available publicly. And they have a full-time HR manager in Australia at the time of this recording at a range of 136 to 170, with the 50th percentile at just over 155K. And of course, then you've got to add on superannuation on cost. So that's how you get up to that 180, 200K annually. So it's not a cheap role, and it takes a lot of really intentional thinking about, is this what we need in our business, and what are the outcomes that we're looking for? Compare that to fractional HR, which can start from around $1,500 per month, depending on how much support you need. So let's say we double that. In the first year, that's roughly 36K per year for that strategic advice and expertise. And then let's say you also add in some administrative support and software for that day-to-day people admin, like maintaining employee files. And you're still at less than half the cost of a full-time HR manager. Now, of course, it's not just about dollars, it's about values. So what are you getting for your spend? You want HR support that helps you avoid risk, improve retention, and of course, build a culture that grows your business. So how do you decide what's right for you? And there's really just some questions you need to start thinking about. So firstly, are you dealing with HR issues every week? Are they occasional? Are you mostly trying to be compliant, or are you actively trying to build a people strategy? Do you need someone on site every day, or is regular structured support enough? And do you have the budget? And is it better spent on deep expertise in short bursts, or is it better spent on someone full-time? So, for example, one of our Accelerate clients were around 60 staff. They were scaling fast. They needed help to build the foundation. So contracts, policies, onboarding, recruitment, leadership development. And they didn't want to hire full-time until they had that structure in place. So they brought us in for the first few months to complete our Accelerate program so we could get all those HR foundations in place. And that gave them time to then eventually hire an internal HR manager to manage that day-to-day operational HR, with us still supporting strategically. So sometimes it's not one or the other, it's both, but they're just phased in the right order. So I hope this has been helpful for you to start thinking about the differences in the types of HR support that might be available. Flexible HR, fractional HR, it's affordable, it's great when you want that expertise without the headcount. Full-time HR makes sense once you've hit scale and you need someone embedded. And if you're unsure, then you can just start with fractional, because that gives you the support now, and then you have the option to then grow that into a full-time solution later. And if this has sparked some questions for your own business, or you're curious about what fractional HR could look like for you, head to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.